If we can work out how to do it for Antarctica, it's a model for everywhere in a way. It's just that Antarctica is such a beautiful example. It doesn't belong to anybody already, but we're saying it ought to belong to itself. It's far too wild and fierce for humans to actually rule it, but really exciting to have a possibility, even if it takes a long time to achieve, of an international law being which is not a state and which can call states to account on behalf of Antarctica and by implication Earth. The Antarctic Treaty was originally signed in 1959 by 12 nations, and an incredibly important and significant achievement at the height of the Cold War, and averting potentially quite serious conflict between nations who had claims over Antarctica. But of course, at the time, it was addressing the issues of the time. It applies only to a defined treaty area, and I don't think anybody thought about the possibility that Antarctica may be harmed by activities arising outside of the treaty area. But now we have climate change, and of course the poles are warming at least twice as fast as anywhere else. The impacts are very significant, but the ATS can't deal with anything outside of its area of jurisdiction. The other issue, of course, is that decisions within the ATS are made by consensus. So given the geopolitical realities at the moment, many very good initiatives, particularly conservation initiatives, establishing new marine protected areas, etc., are very easily blocked and have been blocked for a long time. So there's a huge frustration, I think, within the ATS of the many scientists and people who really love Antarctica and work for Antarctica, that they're stuck in a system where they can't achieve what they know needs to be achieved for Antarctica. And of course, it's possible to renegotiate in 2048. And the fear is that people are already looking at oil and gas reserves there, and there's a real fear that after that there might be serious attempts to weaken the treaty. Somebody asked me, Carola Racketa, who's now a member of the European Parliament, asked me a question a few years ago, could you apply rights of nature to Antarctica? And I said, well, of course you could, but then started thinking about it and was in a way amazed at how little I knew about it. I had completely underestimated the scale, because one sees these little pieces at the bottom of the map, but to find out that the continent is bigger than the US and Mexico combined, and that if you include the Southern Ocean, it's 10% of the surface of the planet. It's driving all the ocean currents, it's absorbing most of the CO2 which the oceans absorb. It's incredibly important for maintaining climate stability. So it's both important to maintaining the climate stability, and it's experiencing some of the most severe impacts from climate change. Now, of course, if there were indigenous people in Antarctica, they would have formed a government, and they would be recognized as a state, and they would have a voice and a seat in international negotiations. They would be sitting at the climate change COP, biodiversity COP, they'd be sitting in the United Nations, and they would be representing Antarctica in those places. But because there are no indigenous people, Antarctica has no voice in the key human decisions which affect it. And at the same time, you've got a group of countries who, within the ATS, who make the decisions. But I think despite the fact that the scientists, etc., are very committed to what's best for Antarctica, most of those countries are making decisions on the basis of their own national interests. And so what's best for Antarctica is lost. And so we think that one of the ways of changing that is if Antarctica were to be recognized as a legal person. By that I mean, at the moment its status is as resources. It's an object in the eyes of the law, and an object can't have rights. But if it were recognized as a legal person, a subject under international law, then it could have rights. But more importantly, perhaps, it would change how we relate to it. We'd be relating to a being, not a place. So we would be recognizing the reality that we're encountering a being. As you and others have said, they never forget that first encounter. I mean, it's a real thing. And the real purpose, of course, of creating rights for Antarctica is Antarctica doesn't really care if you think it's got rights or not. But the rights create corresponding duties on humans to respect those rights. So essentially, we would be saying that one of the rights would be to be represented in human decision-making that affects Antarctica. Of course, the very big challenge is who gets to speak for Antarctica. How does one achieve legitimate representation? You can't have elections as we would do, and it's a question of, would the krill get more votes than the penguins because there are more of them? So, it's a real challenge how to do it. But we think it's very exciting to get humans to think about how do you listen to Antarctica. How, in a sense, of course, Antarctica is signaled in various ways, melting, etc. There's also really interesting research being done on using AI to decode what whales say. So maybe in the future we will actually be able to know what the whales think about things. But there's a lot of thinking and innovations going to have to go into how one chooses the kinds of people. I'm imagining that probably there will be some kind of council or group of people, and we think they're going to be people who need to know a lot about Antarctica, but not just intellectual knowledge. They need to be people who care about Antarctica, so there's a heart connection. And they're probably going to be people who have a particular character. We don't want narcissistic, self-interested people, because that's going to get in the way of being a good voice for Antarctica. So a lot of work to be done, and we want a lot of voices to be heard in that conversation. We don't want to rush to an outcome. But I think incredibly exciting, because if we can work out how to do it for Antarctica, it's a model for everywhere in a way. It's just that Antarctica is such a beautiful example. It would be a pure voice for nature, because there are no people indigenous there. So, and of course, Antarctica is not owned, so it doesn't belong to anybody already. But we're saying it ought to belong to itself. Personally, I think that Antarctica is effectively self-governing. Yes, it does get affected from the outside, but it's far too wild and fierce for humans to actually rule it. And it's a delusion to think you can stick your flag in and rule it. But really exciting to think of it, to have the possibility, even if it takes a long time to achieve, of an international law being which is not a state, and which can call states to account on behalf of Antarctica and by implication Earth. So exciting. The uptake in the Antarctic academic community has been remarkably fast. I mean, it's an idea we started thinking about 3.5, 4 years ago. It's really only been in the public domain, I'd say, for about 2 years. And in December 2024, the Polar Journal published a special edition just on Antarctic rights. So I think it's been really good and much faster than I expected among the academic community. But of course, when one's talking about change as big as what we're proposing, as ambitious as what we're proposing, you need a lot of people behind you. And what we're trying to do is mobilize not only people who are already in the Antarctic community, but the rest of the world, because of course Antarctica is vital to everybody. We're all going to suffer. Africa is going to suffer with the changes, the currents and the weather, etc. So we think that message hasn't really got through. One of the things so on the 1st of December, Antarctica Day this year, we're going to officially launch the Alliance and the campaign. We're going to have events all around the world and then tie them together via media. And then a year after that, Antarctica Day next year, we're going to have an assembly. We haven't quite worked out where, with the idea of bringing together everybody who's interested to sign a declaration, and we'll launch the Declaration for the Rights of Antarctica. And then we're planning a sort of series of events beyond that. But one of the things we'll do with the launch is get people all over the world to organize local events around the launch, and that will be a way of seeding groups in all the different countries that participate, which we hope will remain and continue to push this project forward. We've also got strong relationships with the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, who have members in many countries. And we'll push it through that network. And interesting, in the meeting yesterday, I met somebody, an academic at Oxford, who's part of the Laudato Si movement. So that's the name of the encyclical that Pope Francis put out about human relations with environment. Apparently they have a network globally, and she was also very keen to put out the ideas there. So I suppose our plan broadly is to spread the idea as much as possible through existing networks, people who've been to Antarctica, etc., and get them to commit to an ongoing relationship with Antarctica and for Antarctica. Tourism, of course, is a double-edged sword. It brings so many people now, but the leader of the Australian expeditions, she mentioned what they call the A effect, the Antarctic effect. And she was meaning it, that you can't, whatever your plans are, Antarctica will change them. But it made me think of so many people who've been to Antarctica who talk about a life-changing impact on them. So I think that's going to be critical for us, to find the people who've had the A effect and bring them in and give them some kind of role. A lot of it is going to be building relationships. I mean, some people within the ATS have mistaken what we're doing for an attack on the ATS. It's not the intention at all. We all want to protect Antarctica. If anything, we want to pull the ATS towards greater protection, not the other way, which is what's happening at the moment. There are some things which are incompatible. The ATS recognizes that existing states have claims. I mean, personally, I don't think they're ever going to be realized. But broadly speaking, we're on the same page. Our agenda is to protect Antarctica, not attack or undermine the ATS in any way. So I think there's a lot of bridge building to be done with people within the system. I think a lot of the scientists are going to be very excited and are getting excited about the idea of working together to find out what's best for Antarctica and not thinking about national interests. So I think that's going to be very exciting, and a lot of them are already coming on board. But the big challenge is going to be to bring people all over the world who don't think about Antarctica into that fold. I'm from South Africa. It's the only country in the whole African continent that's within the ATS. The rest aren't. And we need to wake them up to the fact that they ought to care about Antarctica because it's going to affect them. Some of the bridge building will obviously be with NGOs and civil society, importantly with indigenous peoples. To my surprise, many indigenous cultures, it seems, have Antarctica in their cosmology. At our meeting this week, Hinano from Tahiti was explaining how in their cosmology, Antarctica is kind of seen as the feet of this being, which is Earth. Colleagues in North America, or Turtle Island as they refer to it, talk about the fact that part of their responsibilities as indigenous people extend from pole to pole. So we're going to collect a lot of those indigenous visions and put them on our website. But it's also, of course, important to interact with states. So we're hoping that we can start with those who are most likely to be sympathetic, perhaps small island states who are going to be at risk of disappearing through sea level rise, etc. But we think that also many of the states who aren't part of the ATS will be interested. But we want to obviously do it in a way that's inclusive, because I think Antarctica is an extraordinary platform for bringing people together. I mean, Antarctica matters to everybody. So if we can unite around Antarctica, we can mobilize in countries all over the world. And we're hoping that, if necessary, we can litigate on behalf of Antarctica. So if there's a climate change case anywhere in the world, say it's against expanding offshore oil and gas or something like that, to be able to go to court, perhaps initially as a friend of the court, as an amicus, and say, I want to explain to the court that if you let this go ahead, this is what the implications for my clients are going to be. This is how my client's going to be hurt. And maybe Antarctica will one day even litigate in itself. But once it's a legal person, it would have that power around the world. So I see it as both a way of bringing humanity together around a core shared concern, which is important to us all, and also a way of allowing Antarctica to, as it were, exert some influence going outwards in the world, and particularly in the places where climate change harm is originating. I've unofficially visited the Scott Polar Institute in Cambridge. One of our members works there for some of the time. We haven't engaged with them formally, but we would like to do that. I guess our first thought is that we need to solidify our alliance. That's part of the reason I'm here in the UK. I'm meeting with people. Once we've got a firm alliance, we would like to engage with them. But certainly our intention is to reach out and to work from the starting point that the people who are involved are people who love Antarctica. They might not use those words, but they do. And you don't really love an object. It's a relationship between subjects. And I think it'll take some time, and quite frankly, there's likely to be some resistance. It's a very new idea. It'll take some time, but very encouraged by how quickly people have responded to the idea. And when they hear that 10% of the surface of the planet, and not just any 10%, an incredibly important part, has no voice in the global decisions, it seems something's wrong. For the launch on Antarctica Day and the follow-ups, we're wanting people to do things all over the world, and appropriate things which we can link together. But I mean, it would be wonderful if an organization like yours could bring together, say, a panel discussion on Antarctica rights and bring all of those people into one room on Antarctica Day. I mean, it would be, wow. And if you get coverage of that, I mean, those are the kinds of things which will really, get global coverage if we link these things happening all around the world at once, because it's one of our ways of showing that, this is a global issue. It's not just down there. The ice, the water that comes from the melt ice down in Antarctica doesn't stay in Antarctica. The water rises everywhere. Well, I'm an optimist by nature, so I think that if one reads what's happening to the world, it's scary. The science is really scary, but if you only focus on that, you don't get out of bed on a Monday morning. Some of the qualities that are very important here is his perseverance. We don't know how long this takes. I might not live to see it happen, but I think you've got to start what you think is right and continue it. You can't say, I'm only going to do it if I know I'm going to succeed. You've got to do what you think is right. Actually, my wife is an absolute fan of all Antarctic explorers, etc. And so she's always reading me books and telling me bits. And I love that story about Shackleton and his two colleagues when they on South Georgia and they're climbing over the mountain. They need to get to the other side and they realize darkness is falling and they're going to freeze to death and they don't have time to get down. The sort of logical thing, the normal thing would be to, slowly try and make your way down, but almost certainly die. But then they make these pads out of their ropes and they throw themselves into the void. And obviously, incredibly risky thing to do. But even if you've got a 10% chance of succeeding, it's 10% more than zero. And so they take the risk and it pays off. And I think we're in that kind of position now. We need really bold, big action because Antarctica is slowly melting and going down the tubes, and we're going to lose these important ecosystems. So I can't say that this will work, but to me, it's got a chance, and it's the time to be bold and to take these actions and see. And I think that one of the things that I most admire about Shackleton is his leadership. Scott was a national hero, but they all died. He got all his men back, and I think it's absolutely extraordinary. And I think it's really important here because this is not something that one person can achieve. This can only be brought home by a team and by keeping the team together. So I think that his example of leadership is in a way far greater than his achievements in terms of exploration. I certainly think that we're going to need that kind of cohesion of a team over time to bring this home.